All right, let's bring in the group. Bram Resnick, political anchor and well-known reporter for News 12 KPNX in Arizona. He has covered the state for over 25 years. Joel Payne is here, Democratic strategist and former senior aide for Hillary for America. Nayyar Haq, former State Department senior advisor and former White House senior director. Molly Jong-Fast, MS Now political analyst, my dear friend, and host of Fast Politics podcast. And guess, we've got a special treat for you today. Congressman Seth Moulton, Democrat from the great state of Massachusetts, former Marine Corps officer in Iraq, is with us. I'm glad you're all here, especially you, Congressman. But, Bram, we're talking Arizona, so you get to go first. Do Republicans have a real shot of retaking statewide control of Arizona?
That's the big question. We're going to find out whether Republican primary voters are going to nominate candidates who can win a general election. The Republicans here have been on a 4-cycle losing streak, losing statewide office after statewide office. Today is the test. We already know, according to the polls, Andy Biggs, Congressman Andy Biggs, who is at the top of the Republican ticket, is the likely prohibitive nominee for governor. He leads by double digits in the polls. That race appears to have been over for weeks now. He's running against fellow Congressman David Schweikert. Schweikert far behind. Schweikert has warned Republican primary voters that Andy Biggs is unelectable. There is some evidence to back that up. He is an election denier, tried to overturn the 2020 election. So that might not be a great start for taking back statewide offices. We can talk in more detail about the challenges Katie Hobbs faces, but that's right off the bat. Other races farther down the ballot may face similar challenges.
Congressman, what is your thought? All eyes are on Arizona. What do you see as the biggest challenges for Democrats here?
Look, I mean, Biggs is a disaster. And so we just
you work with the guy.
Biggs the bigot. I mean, he's not not a good candidate for the Republicans. But we've got to show that we can actually connect with voters in a meaningful way. That, you know, one of the best conversations I had about the Democratic Party before the last election with the Marine I served with. He said, "Look, I'm an independent. You know, I know what's going on. I don't want to vote for this guy, Trump. He's a nutcase. But you Democrats are so out of touch." There are a lot of people in America who feel that the Democratic Party is out of touch. We can't be honest about what's going on, you know, with immigration. We don't have a plan for immigration. We're not able to say what actually Democrats should do to fix the problem. All we are is opposition to Trump. You know, under Biden, we said inflation is not really a big deal. It's transitory. It's going to go away. And then the whole party said, hey, don't worry. Everything's great. Joe is awesome. He can run for re-election. So the point is, we have this history of kind of just like washing over problems and not addressing real concerns that voters have. We got to make sure we don't do that in Arizona.
Okay, but we've got to make sure. Do you think you're doing that now? Because look no further than a state just north of you, Maine, where I kind of feel like that happened 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that's honest. I mean, to be honest, it's a problem. It's still a problem. So when I do these town halls all across the state, I'll ask people, how many of you are opposed to Trump's immigration enforcement? Every hand in the room goes up, right? Next question. How many of you can tell me what Democrats' immigration policy is? Not a single hand. Like, I've asked thousands of people in Massachusetts this question. They don't have a hand. Immigration policy matters in Arizona. You know, Democrats better have a position on that. Democrats better be able to say, here's what we're going to do to fix the problem, not just hold Trump accountable, which we must do. Prosecute ICE. But let's also say, well, how we're going to fix it.
Well, and this is, I think, where it breaks down to when we nationalize elections, this is where problems start to come up, right? Like Mamdani is a very particular candidate for New York. And Katie for Arizona works for Arizona. So it's actually to the benefit of Republicans right now when we talk about the parties in these very national terms of immigration, ICE versus, culture wars and all of that. The more that the candidates focus on the stats and the economy in their states, the problems in their states, the better off Democrats are.
Okay, well, Bram, you are the Arizona expert. Clearly, immigration is a top issue there. It has been a winning issue for the GOP over the last few years. Has that changed since we've seen ICE tactics in the last 18 months?
That's not clear. You have a lot of Democrats whose target now is ICE detention centers. There's one that's going to go up in the West Valley here, west of Phoenix. That's been a big target. But Arizona helped nationalize the immigration issue. Our border was flooded during the Biden administration. And Governor Katie Hobbs was well aware of this. She told me before the 2024 election, if Joe Biden doesn't get a hold of the border, we're done. he can't win. And ultimately, it was Donald Trump who's gotten hold of it. And Republicans can claim that as a big win. They will. They're also trying to claim the economy in a strange way. We haven't seen how they're going to triangulate with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket and the problems that's caused for the economy. But they're going to go economy and border. And the border is a clear win for them. And to your guest point, no, it's not clear that Democrats have an answer besides protesting outside ICE facilities where there have been real problems.
But isn't that crazy, Congressman? Just because Republicans have an actual plan, that makes immigration a win for them, despite the fact that what their plan is deeply damaging and unpopular.
Exactly, because this is criminal what they're doing. I mean, and I was.
But let's talk about Democrats and what
No, you're right. This is criminal what Trump is doing. And the fact that we don't even have an answer to that is a real problem. Look, I think we have to have accountability first and foremost. So, yes, abolish ICE, prosecute these people for breaking the law, but then show how we're going to fix the problem, right? How are we going to create an immigration system that actually incentivizes people to come here legally rather than illegally? Because right now it's easier for people to come across the border than to go through the bureaucratic process.
But talk to us about Arizona.
I think these are all great points, but one of the things that we shouldn't miss here is Arizona is actually a good case for Democrats about identifying iconoclastic, independent, locally connected, locally resonant candidates, whether it's Katie Hobbs, Mark Kelly, Ruben Gallego. These are folks who are able to get beyond the brand of the Democratic Party, right? The Democratic Party has limitations on its brand. Those individuals are able to supersede that brand because they have local resonance and they have credibility on the ground because they are independent and they have heterodox opinions on issues. And Arizona is actually one of the it's actually a good case for Democrats to study. Arizona, Georgia, those are good cases for Democrats to study.
Hold on, Molly. Hold on, we're going to Molly.
I want to add, first of all, I understand the framing you're using, but it's very right-wing framing, right? And that's fine because you're running in Massachusetts. But if we're going to talk about Arizona, which I think is what
that's the plan.
We're talking about. Look, Democrats are really lucky, right? Because this is a candidate. This guy is
Andy Biggs.
Andy Biggs is just the same as Kerry Lake, right? He's that same kind of very MAGA, very extreme. Arizona is not that kind of state. It's not a ruby red state. It's a swing state. So I do think this is good for them. And I also think, there are some really big issues here that are sort of a part of this Trump deportation thing, which is these ICE detention centers. People really don't like them. They don't like them popping up right next to their houses. And then you have the data centers, which is another huge issue in Arizona. And I was in Arizona actually pretty recently talking to people on the ground. And what I heard again and again was the data centers. They're so freaked out because they have a real water problem in that state. And these data centers use a ton of power and water. So I do think there are a lot of Arizona-centric issues that are very good for Democrats.
Right? Democrats had a successful run in the West before, and part of that with the Salazars and the Schweitzers of the world was tapping into local water, natural resources issues, showing how deeply tied they were to the land, and standing up for what we know as civil rights and liberties and broader values, right? That's what makes them local, quote unquote, mavericks, right? And the challenge is Biggs is not a maverick, right? He is towing the Trump line. He is not local guy who is standing up for his people in the way that Katie is.
I campaigned for Ruben Gallego down in Arizona, and Ruben is an amazingly progressive leader, right? But he was not afraid to say, we got to have a secure border as part of a humane immigration program. Here's how we are going to take care of immigration. He was not afraid to bring out his record as a veteran and talk about being in the Marine Corps and what he learned from serving in combat. The point is he was iconoclastic in a lot of ways. He connected to local issues. And he's not using right-wing framing. He was just saying, I'm here, I'm going to solve these problems. I'm not just going to play the political game. I'm going to solve these problems.
Hold that thought. We're going to get Bram back in here. Arizona bore the brunt of sort of the election denial fallout, you could say, of 2020. Tell us, Bram, is that top of mind for voters, even remotely? Because it certainly is for the president.
That is a really good question, having lived through that several years ago, and it's still present with us to this day. What the pollsters tell me is, you know what? They're past that. Voters are past that. And what they're concerned about is affordability and the economy. One thing you need to remember about Arizona is people moved here because it was affordable. We got people, California, all over the country. They could buy a big 3,000 square foot house. You can't do that anymore. And that's a big issue. I'm very interested to see whether the election denier argument works. Andy Biggs is certainly a trophy case for it, given his history, his embrace of Trump, his embrace of denying the 2020 election. But I wouldn't overlook the key issues. Again, affordability, the economy, they matter.
Yeah, I think just on the election denier point, look, that has taken down Republican candidates in recent elections, whether it's Kari Lake, whether it's, Andy Biggs, some of these other folks. And I pair Arizona and Georgia together because they actually have very similar profiles. In Georgia as well, you've had a state where Donald Trump has actually gotten pushback from within the Republican Party because people don't like this. So I agree with Bram's framing that voters don't want to go back to that. But I think they think about it from the perspective of, why are you talking about 2020? Why are you constantly bringing this thing up that's settled law? And I actually think that that's undercutting Republicans in places like Arizona.
Well, and don't you think it could be a bigger issue if Trump tries to interfere with the midterms?
Absolutely.
We'll expect him to do.
Absolutely.
But remember, this is a state which I think is interesting, where you've seen Republicans in the primary field nominate people who are who are really ruby red candidates and not swing candidates. And that's something that Democrats get accused of doing sometimes. But we really do see that with Republicans. This is a state where
Democrats do it too.
No, for sure. But this is a state where Blake Masters ran. I mean, remember Blake Masters? I have to bring up Blake Masters all the time. But that's like, Peter Thiel picked candidates for that state, and they were a disaster. So I do think we see that.
And Arizona, more independents than Democrats. Actually, I think Republicans first and then independents. The fact that Democrats have been able to win over independents, again, a very good test case that Democrats should look to replicate and carbon copy across the country.